Welcome to our deep dive. We're going to explore the life of Grigori Rasputin and try to figure out if he was a true mystic or just a really good manipulator who preyed on a vulnerable royal family.
Well, the sources you've provided give us a really fascinating look into his life and the influence he had. He's definitely a captivating and controversial figure.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Rasputin was born a Siberian peasant, and he couldn't even read or write. And his name, Rasputin, it actually means debauched one, which is interesting considering the kind of life he ended up living.
It certainly sets the stage for all the controversy that would follow him. And his early life is just as intriguing. He converted to religion at 18 and ended up spending time with the Cleisty sect, who are known for their extreme religious practices.
The Cleisty, those are the ones who were seeking spiritual ecstasy through pretty intense rituals, right?
Exactly. And Rasputin, he didn't exactly follow their beliefs to the letter. Instead, he kind of twisted some of them around to support his idea of holy passionlessness, which he said could be achieved through, get this, sexual exhaustion.
Wow, that's a bit of a contradiction for a guy who's supposed to be all about religious devotion.
It certainly is one of the many contradictions that make Rasputin such a fascinating character. He's definitely not easy to categorize.
So how does a Siberian peasant with such a controversial past end up in the inner circle of the Russian royal family?
Well, it's a combination of ambition and being in the right place at the right time. After his time with the Cleisty, he went on pilgrimages to Mount Athos and Jerusalem. He lived off of donations and built up a reputation as a starets, which is like a spiritual elder in Russian Orthodoxy, often seen as having healing and prophetic powers.
So it sounds like he was actively building a persona for himself, playing into what was popular at the time.
Yes, and the social context is crucial here. During that period, there was a growing fascination with mysticism and the occult among the upper class in St. Petersburg. And Rasputin, with his intense stare and claims of supernatural abilities, found a very receptive audience.
And this fascination helped him gain access to the Romanovs.
Precisely. In 1905, he was introduced to Tsar Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra, whose son, Alexei, suffered from hemophilia. And this would prove to be a very pivotal moment.
Hemophilia was a really serious condition, especially back then.
Oh, absolutely. And in 1908, during one of Alexei's bleeding episodes, Rasputin was called to the palace. They say he was able to ease the boy's suffering, which seemed to defy medical expectations at the time.
Do we have any idea how he might have done that? Was it some sort of medical treatment?
It's thought that he may have used hypnotic suggestion. Whatever he did, the effect was undeniable. When Rasputin was leaving the palace, he made a pretty dramatic statement. He told the parents that their son's destiny and the fate of the entire dynasty was now tied to his own.
That must have had a huge impact on the royal family, especially considering how desperate they were to help their son.
It did. It solidified his place in the royal court, and his influence started to grow rapidly. He became a close confidant to the Empress, someone she really trusted, especially when it came to her son's health.
But we know that his life outside the palace was quite different from the image of a devout holy man.
That's true. While he was putting on a show of humility and piety in front of the royal family, Rasputin was living a completely different life outside the palace. He had a lot of mistresses, and there are stories about him trying to seduce countless women.
And he justified this by saying it was purification through physical contact.
Believe it or not, yes. He claimed that physical contact with him had purifying and healing effects. It was a really twisted way to justify his behavior. What's even more surprising is that even though the Tsar heard about Rasputin's scandalous actions, he refused to believe it. He remained totally convinced of Rasputin's holiness, seeing him as a protector for his son, and anyone who dared to speak against Rasputin faced the Tsar's anger.
So he was basically untouchable because the Tsar had so much faith in his powers.
For a while, yes, he had the Empress's ear, and through her, he had a lot of influence over the Tsar himself. But this power wouldn't last forever. As his influence grew, so did the resentment and fear surrounding him, and that would set the stage for some pretty dramatic events. But people were starting to notice what he was up to.
So they began to see him as a threat rather than a holy man.
Exactly. A lot of people felt that his influence was corrupting the government and even hurting the war effort.
And that led to people wanting him out, right?
Yes. By 1916, the calls for Rasputin's removal had reached a fever pitch. People from all walks of life, from everyday citizens to high-ranking officials, wanted him gone.
So how did Rasputin handle all this pressure?
He never backed down. He was a shrewd operator. He knew his position was shaky, but he clung to power, still influencing the Empress and relying on her absolute faith in him.
But even Alexandra's support couldn't shield him forever. It seems like his enemies were bound to take drastic measures.
You're absolutely right. The situation was just too volatile. Rasputin had created too many powerful enemies, and the stakes were incredibly high. And that's when a conspiracy started to take shape, one that would ultimately lead to his demise.
And this is where Prince Felix Yusupov comes in, correct?
Yes. Yusupov, a wealthy and influential prince who was married to the Tsar's niece, became the mastermind behind the plot to assassinate Rasputin.
What was his motivation? Was it purely political, or were there personal reasons too?
Like many others, Yusupov was convinced that Rasputin was a danger to the monarchy. He saw Rasputin as a corrupting force on the Tsarina and a threat to Russia's stability. He believed that getting rid of Rasputin was the only way to prevent the country from falling apart.
So how did they actually go about assassinating him? It's a story that has become quite legendary over time.
Well, the details of the night Rasputin was killed have been debated and embellished over the years. But what we do know is that on December 29th, 1916, Rasputin was lured to Yusupov's Moika Palace.
And what was the excuse they used?
They told him he would be meeting Yusupov's wife, Irina, who was known for her beauty. Given Rasputin's reputation, he probably couldn't resist the invitation.
So what happened when he got to the palace?
According to Yusupov, he offered Rasputin food and drinks that were poisoned. But Rasputin didn't seem to react to the poison, which made the conspirators even more anxious.
So did they have a backup plan?
They did. When the poison didn't work, Yusupov shot Rasputin multiple times.
And that was it for him?
Not exactly. Even though he'd been shot, Rasputin managed to escape the palace and run into the courtyard. That's where he was finally shot and killed by another one of the conspirators, Vladimir Purishkevich.
A dramatic ending for a controversial figure.
Right.
But the story doesn't end there, right? What did they do with his body?
To cover up the murder, the conspirators threw Rasputin's body into the Neva River.
They really wanted to make sure he was gone. Did their plan work? I mean, did the assassination actually achieve what they hoped it would?
That's a tough question. In the short term, assassinating Rasputin didn't really help stabilize Russia. Some people even argue that it might have actually sped up the collapse of the Romanov dynasty.
How so?
Well, the assassination, while initially welcomed by some, ended up dividing Russian society even more. It made Rasputin into a martyr and fueled the unrest that was already spreading throughout the country.
And Alexandra's reaction to the assassination probably didn't make things any better.
You're right. The Tsarina was heartbroken by Rasputin's death. She refused to believe any of the accusations against him and continued to view him as a saint. Her unwavering support for Rasputin, even after he was gone, only alienated her further from the Russian people and contributed to the growing dissatisfaction with the monarchy.
So, in a way, the assassination backfired. Instead of removing the threat to the monarchy, it made things worse.
That's one way to see it. But it's important to keep in mind that the situation in Russia was extremely complicated. There were many factors that contributed to the fall of the Romanov dynasty, and Rasputin's assassination was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
So where does all this leave us in our search for the truth about Grigori Rasputin? Was he a holy man or a master manipulator?
It's a question that continues to intrigue and divide historians. Was he truly a devout mystic with healing abilities, or was he a cunning opportunist who took advantage of a desperate royal family? Maybe, as is often the case with complicated historical figures, he was a little bit of both.
It's tempting to try to put him in a neat category, but the truth is probably much more nuanced.
Exactly. Rasputin's story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's full of shades of gray, and the motivations of people, especially those in positions of power, are often complicated and multifaceted.
His life was certainly a whirlwind of contradictions. A peasant turned mystic, a healer with a scandalous reputation, a man with immense influence who met a violent end.
And his legacy continues to captivate us over a century after his death. He's still a subject of fascination, debate, and speculation.
So for our listeners, what do you think is the most important thing to remember about his story?
What strikes me is how Rasputin's life reflects the turbulent times he lived in. Russia was on the verge of revolution. The old order was crumbling. Rasputin, with his mystical pronouncements and claims of healing powers, was both a symptom of and a contributor to this upheaval.
He seemed to embody both the hopes and the fears of a nation on the brink of collapse.
Exactly. And while he may not have single-handedly brought down the Romanov dynasty, there's no doubt that his influence added to the growing sense of instability and discontent that ultimately led to their downfall.
It's amazing how Rasputin gained so much power, even though he came from such humble beginnings and had all those scandals swirling around him.
It really shows you the power of personality, timing, and opportunity. Rasputin was undeniably charismatic, some might even say mesmerizing, and he knew how to navigate the social scene of his time. He understood what the royal family was afraid of and used those fears to his advantage.
So you're saying he was a master manipulator.
That's an easy label to use, but it's important to look at the bigger picture. Rasputin's belief in his own healing powers, no matter how strange they may seem, could have been real. That doesn't excuse his manipulative actions, but it does add another layer to his complex personality.
It seems like Rasputin's story really challenges us to think beyond just labeling historical figures as good guys or bad guys.
Absolutely. The truth is often much more complicated, and that's what makes exploring history so fascinating. It's about wrestling with these complexities and understanding the many sides of human nature.
So, for our listeners who are now interested in this period of Russian history, what are some key takeaways they should keep in mind?
First off, it's crucial to understand the context of the social and political turmoil that was happening in Russia at the time. The Romanov dynasty was already facing a crisis of legitimacy, and Rasputin's presence only made things worse.
So his presence sort of accelerated the empire's collapse.
That's one way to look at it. He became a focal point for people's discontent, embodying the anxieties and frustrations they felt toward the ruling class.
His story also highlights the dangers of unchecked power, both in politics and personal relationships.
Absolutely. The way Rasputin influenced the royal family, especially the Empress, shows how personal beliefs and vulnerabilities can be exploited even at the highest levels of power.
It seems like Rasputin's story serves as a warning, reminding us to think critically and question those who claim to have special powers.
Yes, it does. Rasputin's tale encourages us to consider how charisma and manipulation can intertwine with historical forces, shaping the fate of nations.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what final thought would you leave our listeners with?
Rasputin's legacy is a powerful reminder of the enduring allure of mystery and intrigue. His story continues to fascinate us and spark debate, showing us that history isn't just a collection of facts, but a dynamic tapestry woven with ambition, faith, manipulation, and the constant struggle for power. It's a story that invites us to dig deeper, to question, and to explore the subtle nuances of the past, because by doing so, we gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world we live in.